I don't want a boring paddle, so I'll pick a fight. And what I'll say is that they are not an asset class, but they are an asset for sure.
Gonna hop right into the first question, which is, are cryptocurrencies a new asset class? Are these digital assets, these tokens, do they need to be defined by new legislation?
I've been living and working in Japan for about 20 years. Japan has always recognized Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as an asset class. It actually, in fact, in Japan, Bitcoin is legal tender, so you can actually buy and sell goods with Bitcoin. Now, that's kind of an important aspect because Japan's third largest economy in the world. It's something we need to pay attention to. It's very different in other countries. And I want to ask the question back, if it wasn't an asset class, why would governments around the world be thinking so hard about how to tax it?
Yeah, I definitely agree it's a new asset class. If you think about all the asset classes, the 5 biggest ones are what they call securities equities, bonds, real estate, precious metals, and foreign currencies. And I think the reason the countries all over the world have so much trouble with how to create and define regulation for Bitcoin is because Bitcoin does not fit into any one of these. It has aspects of all 5 of these asset classes, but I think Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, is a unique beast. That's why countries and regulators will have a challenge.
I agree with that, and I would add there's a bifurcation of the token market happening. That's kind of the space that I'm in, between these so-called protocol coins or utility coins and their counterpart we like to call security tokens. And these are asset-backed tokens. They're launched during regulated security token offerings. Investors expect a profit, whereas in utility tokens, they're just purchasing like a ticket or access to the protocol. So that's kind of 2 separate asset classes, I guess, within the broader token world. And I think it's important to pay attention between the 2 because right now security tokens are just a speck of dust, just a fraction of 1% of the total market cap. But a lot of thought leaders in this space think that there's a emergence and mega trend happening where real kind of securitized tokens become even bigger than their utility counterparts.
Okay, I don't want a boring paddle, so I'll pick a fight. And what I'll say is that they are not an asset class, but they are an asset for sure. And an asset class is a very technical term in portfolio management that really distinguishes things from other areas. And you've got fixed income equities, real estate, commodities, et cetera. And I would argue that it's not unique there. However, it's not necessarily the right question. The right question is, how does it fit within the regulatory framework and the legislative framework? And it needs a lot of work. I've heard from the portfolio companies we're working with great things about Wyoming, for example. And I would say there's a very rich history of how to treat all kinds of investment instruments under the tax rules. And under the tax rules, you'll see different treatments for securities tokens offerings that distinguish them from utility tokens offerings in the United States. And those are critical distinctions. And it's also frustrating dealing with governments often because they're reactive and they're not keeping up.
For example, you see internal conflicts just within the US. The SFC sees cryptocurrency as a security. CFTC sees it as a commodity.
Exactly.
FINRA,
at the same time.
yeah. FINRA sees it as money, but IRS, funnily enough, sees it as property for obvious tax reasons, right? So I think the only way we could future-proof this new asset class would really rely upon the regulators and giving us guidelines on what exactly it is, what kind of beast this is. It's such a hybrid beast at the moment that we're also confused.
What do you think are some of the key differences between this new asset class or not and assets that they're traditionally investing into? So how are we going to encourage the flow of money while at the same time making sure that we have enough wiggle room to build the companies that we're working on right now?
Well, I think this is where Japan actually got it wrong, because Japan was very quick in establishing the fact that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are an asset class. However, what they did do is they said, you're very happy for you to hold these cryptocurrencies. However, when you sell them, you have to pay taxes in the amount of 55%. That's why Japanese buy but never sell. And that's exactly the problem. So again, they got it right on the way in, but wrong on the way out.
In Hong Kong, there is no capital gains tax on crypto. And I think that's really hard to beat. Second to that, I'm seeing a lot of ICOs establish their entities in Hong Kong, primarily because if they did the raise outside of Hong Kong, it is also taxed at 0%. The reason is because Hong Kong has a territorial tax system, meaning they only tax on income derived onshore. So if it's done offshore, i.e. on a ferry to Macau, then it's classified as offshore.
And what do you guys think are some of the different use cases for tokens that exist in our ecosystems that have not yet been seen before in traditional financial instruments?
In the traditional sense of ownership, you have a share certificate that collects dust in a filing cabinet. But with tokens, you can command them and program them to do interesting things like pay dividends, like automate proxy voting schedules, like automate a lot of your entire back office and putting your cap table on smart contracts. So to me, that's kind of a new evolution from kind of paper to digital to smart contracts is the next evolution.
I really think the next wave, the most disruptive wave, will be the security tokens disrupting how venture capital industries work. Just for that reason, that angel investors and early stage venture capital investors are very entrepreneurial individuals anyway, and they're likely to subscribe to new technologies. They don't necessarily need to work with venture capital firms anymore. They can just bypass them, and the venture companies can go directly to the investors using securities token offerings.
Currently, with ICOs, anyone can invest, right? But with STOs, there's going to be regulations around only accredited investors will be coming in. So it's going to be the big boys club all over again. How do we ensure that there'll be more individuals coming in and playing in this space? Because ultimately, with this type of technology, you want mass user adoption, and therefore a lot of investors coming in.
It's about changing the rules, right? The reason traditional securities require accredited investors because the SEC stepped in to protect investors and to make sure there's not a lot of snake oil salesperson trying to sell phantom shares. So maybe that has to be rolled back a little bit.
Not a lot of people know this, but Ethereum actually minted more millionaires than any other company in the history of the world, at one point over 10,000. And guess how many of them were accredited? Not many. So, if the SEC came in and made Ethereum a security, which to their credit they didn't, then all of these people wouldn't have been able to build wealth kind of investing in an exciting new project that they knew was interesting because they're technical. And even though they didn't have a lot of money to be accredited, they still knew this was a big opportunity. So I think it's encouraging.
But then the question is, what about with not just tokens, but what about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin?
Think about Bitcoin. Now, you've just seen a Bitcoin, even though nobody in the world has ever seen a Bitcoin. So in other words, what I'm trying to say to you is we're creating an asset and an asset class that none of us have ever seen, but we have a connection to it. And that's why the rules don't apply. We need to change the rules because we actually created something that we don't even know what it is.
I think the only way to get more people to invest is to get more people to understand it. I think today, even at these conferences, there's not enough people that truly understand that Bitcoin represents a new asset class in the form that it's information possession based. So traditional asset classes are either physical in nature, like gold or any cars or real estate, or actually real estate is not. The reason is that the secondary class is that they're titled to your name, to your identity. So real estate, cars, airplanes, boats are all titled. You own it by virtue of your identity being on the title paperwork. Whereas Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, you own it not because of your identity, not because of physical possession, but because of knowledge of the information of the private key. So that's the biggest difference.
I think for real massive broad adoption, we pat ourselves on the back. Even today, there's hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth that we've generated in the crypto world. But that's still like one hedge fund in New York. So, relatively speaking, we're still kind of a rounding error. And I think that's one of the reasons we don't get the attention we think we deserve from politicians and whatnot, is we're just not like big enough. We're not a systemic risk to the market yet. So how do we get kind of the mainstream real capital, the Fidelities, the trillions of dollars to migrate over? And again, I think that's where kind of the regulated security token bridge comes in.
Yeah, Chris, closing comments?
Yeah, I agree. I think, the real challenge is getting the cryptocurrencies into a central part of the payment system. That means it needs to be broadly adopted and ubiquitous, used at the retail level, and accepted by all banks and central banks. And We're not there yet, but there have been many tremendous battles that we've succeeded at, so it's promising in the long term.
And Sandy?
I think as we emerge from the crypto winter, spring is looking very bright. So hopefully we'll see a lot more new custody offerings, as well as new regulations that would guide us to the new path, the new journey.
When is spring?
It's happening.